Chapter 7, Twin Primes. These last chapters venture ever so slightly from the hex filtration topic chart. I'm sure you might have noticed the topics start to veer somewhat when you read the previous chapter. This chapter is going to focus on what I call the dual primes calculator formula. FYI, this method is not complete. Don't assume that it is fully functional. I left it here only for reference, and I feel it can work if anyone wants to brave its challenge, although I don't recommend that you do. Basically, it is best expressed like this. Where the hex filtration chart was designed to focus on hexadecimal digits because it could represent 4 base 10 digits at any given point, this formula is intended to focus on only 2 base 10 digits at any given point. And I caution you, this is presented only for the most dedicated and advanced student. If you're not accustomed to this sort of stuff already, then I expect this chapter to challenge you, because it's tough. One of the main concepts of this formula is that almost everything is based upon a value of x. Once the formula has been calculated for x at any given point of y, you should have two separate numbers. For simplicity's sake, let's call these numbers a and b. Oh, and just to be clear, when n equals 0, the variable y can be any value you choose up to a max of x plus 1 divided by 3 plus x. However, this has an exception that will be explained later. The value of y directly determines what the values of a and b are for us to work with. In a way, if you remember my hex filtration chart, you could say that x corresponds to which row on the chart we are working with, and y corresponds to whichever column on the chart we are working with. Anyway, back to my point. Like I said, you get two numbers from the initial calculation of x. These are, in essence, the base values for a and b at position y for x. Now, to validate that a and b are prime, we have to individually calculate for all the previous values of the variable x, which itself must always correlate with a prime number via 2 times x minus n plus 1 check. The reason I subtract n from x is because I assume x to be a constant that always refers to the value it was given when we calculated for the base values of a and b. The n is simply intended to reduce that base value of x so that we can correctly calculate for all of the previous iterations of x all the way back to the equivalent value of x equals 1 effectively. Thus, it should go without saying that the value of n increases by 1 each time we finish a calculation of this formula, which, mind you, is intended to confirm or deviate from the base values of a and b. Every time I use the term recursion, I am referring to all the times this formula is recalculated with an increasing value of x. Now that said, when n is not equal to 0, i.e. during recursion, then the values of x and y cannot be arbitrarily chosen. The x value is fixed and the y variable is calculated with the formula x minus n plus 2 divided by 3 plus x minus n plus y plus 1. I figure this is simple enough so I'll avoid expounding upon it any further. Now to explain the z variable. I have found that many people are concerned that the fact that z inherently increases its value with regard to x. I understand the point they are making, though I believe z should never become an issue. The fact is, the value of z is always going to be less than the value of x. In fact, it will become increasingly less than x as the value of x increases. This is because z only tracks the number of times that 2x plus 1 check happens to equate to a prime number value. I'd like to point out that this should always be easy to determine if 2x plus 1 calculation is prime, because any value derived from it is always going to be less than anything for that particular x value. Of course, that assumes that you have already calculated all of the previous values of x with each of their associated values of y. I suppose it should be understood that I've intended that my formula be used to calculate primes starting at x equals 2 while progressing through each value of y as well. Twin primes cheat sheet. X equals any number from 2 into infinity. However, 2 times x minus n plus 1 must be used to determine if x equates to a prime number even during recursion. Y equals any number from 0 to x plus 1 divided by 3 plus x, except when n is not equal to 0, in which case y equals x minus n plus 2 divided by 3 plus x minus n plus y plus 1. Z equals the total number of primes found by calculating 2x plus 1 for the current and all previous values of x. Note, if z mod 2 equals 0, then multiply the value of z by 2. N equals the number of steps removed from x during recursion from 0 to x minus 1. A equals 2 times x minus n plus 1 to the power of 2 plus 4 plus 6 times 2 times y plus z divided by 2 times x minus n plus 1 minus z plus y minus 1 divided by 2 times x minus n plus 1. Z equals 2 times x minus n plus 1 to the power of 2 plus 6 times 2 times y plus 1 divided by 2 times x minus n plus 1 minus y divided by 2 times x minus n plus 1. Note, if x minus n equals 1, use a equals 6 times y plus 11, and b equals 6 times y plus 13 instead of the normal formula for calculating a and b. Also, if x mod 3 is not equal to 3 and y equals x plus 1 divided by 3 plus x, then b is not prime. It's important to note that all the values of a and b at x equals 1 for any point of y act as a sort of checks and balances verification for the initially established base values of a and b at whatever x value the equation was started from. So if none of the recursive values of a and b ever deviate from their respective x equals 1 associated counterparts, then you will have established them to be prime. Tip: with any value of x that fails its 2x plus 1 prime check, the previously calculated x value directly preceding it can have its max value of y extended. Extension: 2 plus x divided by 3 plus x plus 1. X equals the same as the x that failed its prime check. For example, x equals 4 will fail its prime check. So the previous successful x value, in this case it's x equals 3, can have its y value extended to 11. This is because the extension value when calculated at x equals 4 equates to 7. Add this to the original max y value for x equals 3, which is normally a 4, to get a new max value of 11 for x equals 3. You can even use this with multiple back-to-back x check fails. Also, the primes formula uses several division calculations, which often create trailing decimal values. These decimals have no use and can simply be discarded. Example: if x equals 2, y equals 0, n equals 0, then a equals 29, b equals 31, and z equals 2 times 2. Now, calculating these numbers at n equals 1, the value becomes x equals 2, y equals 3, n equals 1, a equals 29, b equals 31, and z equals 1. These results validate that both a and b for x equals 2 at y equals 0 are prime because during recursion where the n equals 1, neither a nor b deviated from the number value. Another example: if x equals 2, y equals 1, n equals 0, then a equals 41, b equals 37, and z equals 2 times 2. Notice how z has the extra multiplier. This is because there were two successful 2x plus 1 prime checks, one for x equals 1 and one for x equals 2. You might have also noticed this same case for the previous example. This is because both examples are working with the same value of x. Now to determine if the numbers for this example are prime by increasing the value of n and recalculating for y and a and b. X equals 2, y equals 4, n equals 1, A equals 35, B equals 37, and Z equals 1. Do you see how the value of A deviates as it goes from 41 to 35? This proves that 35, the value determined for the value of x equals 1, the checks and balances value, is not prime.